How did a mysterious 17th century woman leave such a lasting mark on a seaside Connecticut town? The answer involves one of the earliest witchcraft trials in the American colonies, and a redemption story that still sparks debate today. Oh yes, there is history here. Settled in 1639, Stratford is well known for a bunch of things. These include its beaches and boating scene, airport and aerospace museum, historic lighthouse, and quirky cultural sites. As you'll find with many historic towns and cities in New England, once you look past the breathtaking Long Island Sound views, the quaint green, and the bustling city center, you'll unearth some secrets. Of the haunted kind, of course. Stratford has been no stranger to haunted history. Even the iconic horror writer Stephen King spent part of his childhood growing up in Stratford, drawing inspiration from parts of the town, including the library, in novels such as It. The town was also home to a well-known haunted mansion, the Phelps Mansion, and even hosted a museum of the occult. But ask any longtime resident of Stratford about the town's past, and one name will inevitably pop up in conversations: a woman from the mid-1600s named Goody Bassett. Who is she? Only the first ever individual indicted for witchcraft in Stratford and the county it sits in, Fairfield County, and the fourth person in the colony of Connecticut to have been convicted and hanged on witchcraft charges. Although she's real, Bassett has long been the object of tall tales. She's the kind of person who locals believe materializes if you say her name 3 times in a row, or step out of line. Her spirit has even been blamed for the famous Phelps Mansion hauntings, which involves demonic dioramas, knockings, and other poltergeist activity. However, these are based on unsubstantiated rumors regarding where she lived or was buried. But as famous as Bassett is around town, she is a woman shrouded in mystery. There are no official records addressing the details of her infamous witch trial, including what exactly she was accused of. Historians, and the town for that matter, do not even know Bassett's true first name. Goody is actually short for goodwife, a common colonial-era title given to married women from lower socioeconomic classes. Still, what records there are about her, along with the legends and rumors associated with her story, have shed light into what former town clerk and historian William Howard Wilcoxson described as the saddest and most distressing event in all of Stratford's long history. The circumstances surrounding her legend and fate would also fuel efforts to repair Bassett's legacy centuries later, which we'll cover in a bit. But first, it's good to know some context about the Bassetts themselves, at least based on what we know, and, just as importantly, the political climate in the colony of Connecticut. Based on the records we have, Goody Bassett was married to carpenter Thomas Bassett, and were among the original settlers of Windsor, Connecticut. While historians agree that Thomas had sailed over from England on the ship the Christian between 1634 and 1635, there is some disagreement regarding the circumstances around his arrival. Some believe he originally settled in Dorchester, Massachusetts in 1635, eventually moving to Windsor with other congregation members. Others state that he made his way to Windsor after arriving as an apprentice for the Styles Party, eventually earning freeman status in 1640. What brought the Bassetts to Stratford? Ironically, according to current town historian David Wright, the reason likely is connected to a witch trial. At a town event honoring Bassett in 2023, Wright said that he and other historians are confident that based on recent research, the Bassetts primarily moved out of Windsor to escape allegations of Goody's close association with Alice Young, a local healer. In 1647, Alice became the first person to be executed for witchcraft in Connecticut, and in all of the 13 colonies for that matter. Historians believe that her conviction was tied to a string of deaths arising from an influenza epidemic in Windsor that year. Because Alice's husband, John Young, and Thomas Bassett were both carpenters, it's highly likely that Alice and Goody knew each other well and were in the same social circles. By the time of Goody's trial 4 years later, it's believed that the Bassetts had settled in the Tanner's Brook area of Stratford, in the vicinity of Stratford's current downtown area and train station. Interestingly, Thomas Thornton, Alice's neighbor in Windsor, also moved to Stratford around the same time. He lost 4 children to the epidemic associated with Alice's conviction. His daughter, Priscilla, even claimed to her father on her deathbed that she had been troubled by Satan and hoped that other children would get power over their sinful natures. While not much is documented or known about Alice's trial, it's likely Thornton and his family may have played a role in her conviction. Thornton, who later befriended a key figure in the Salem Witch Trials, Cotton Mather, was appointed as Stratford's deputy to the Connecticut General Court the same year Goody was tried. The General Court was the forerunner to Connecticut state government and played a role in Goody's trial. Alice's husband, John Young, also moved to Stratford, becoming one of the town's original grantees. After she settled in, Bassett allegedly established friendships and acquaintances with other women in the area of what is now the greater Bridgeport area. These included goodwife Napa Fairfield, whose fate would tie in closely to what would occur in Bassett's trial. In the early years of the Connecticut Witchcraft Trials, the colony was facing unusual weather patterns that were leading to diminished crop yields. It was also a society on edge. Residents of Stratford and elsewhere in Connecticut were living in the face of threats from local Native American tribes and of territorial encroachment by the Dutch, who controlled what is now New York. It did not help that Connecticut's residents perceived their government leaders at the time to be weak. Against the backdrop of these tensions, the period of 1651 to 1654 ended up being the deadliest period for those accused of witchcraft until the Hartford witchcraft trials in the 1660s. Of the 6 known individuals accused during this period, 5 were convicted and hanged. And in that first year, for unknown reasons, Bassett was formally charged with this crime. Bassett's trial took place sometime in May 1651. The only official reference to it is a brief entry from Connecticut's colonial government records. According to the statement, the General Court ordered Connecticut Governor John Haynes, along with magistrates Henry Clark and Captain John Culloch, to travel to Stratford to prosecute Goody Bassett on witchcraft charges. While there is no documentation stating why Bassett was charged, you can find a wide-ranging list of reasons if you ask locals. Some allege that people started hallucinating and feeling ill not long after Bassett's arrival. Others place blame on her for a series of poor harvests that coincided with her move. According to Fairfield University professor Dr. Anna Lawrence in an article with CT Insider, Bassett was likely seen as abrasive. But regardless of the possible accusations, most witch trials in Connecticut followed a predictable structure, and one that Goody likely would have needed to go through for hers. Going by Connecticut's witchcraft laws, those prosecuting witchcraft charges would have needed to show that the accused had intimacy with the devil. In truth, many of these accusations were often associated with property and neighbor disputes, gender biases, psychological conditions, unsuccessful healings, and the need to find scapegoats for natural, health-related, and political problems beyond society's control. But unlike what you would expect in a state criminal trial today, colonial authorities had a far easier path to convict an accused witch. Goody's accusers would have likely served a complaint to a local magistrate or officer alleging that she was engaged in witchcraft. From there, authorities would decide whether to move forward with an investigation. Those leading the investigations often subpoenaed civilian witnesses for primarily oral testimony and could have ordered bodily examinations of the defendant for marks of the devil. They also often authorized searches of the accused's home for poppets, books, charms, and other items tied to witchcraft. During her investigation, Goody would have either been allowed to live freely or been detained. If accused witches were detained, they would usually be held at a jail, or, if that was not an option, at a local sheriff's home using physical restraints like iron clasps and rope. Those accused of witchcraft were not entitled to a presumption of innocence, nor any entitlement to a burden of proof that would have required evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to convict. What would have moved the case past the investigation stage? Some finding that a witchcraft-related event did occur, and the existence of evidence that would suggest the defendant was behind it. To complicate matters, Bassett, much like other witch hunt trial defendants, would not have been entitled to an attorney to defend her. This was in line with English law customs at the time. And given the lack of trained lawyers in the New England colonies during this period, it's not like the courts precisely followed the common law principles governing cases back in England. These proceedings were also influenced by biblical scripture, Mosaic law, and the church. Most testimony also took for granted that magic was used. Once the magistrate or officer in charge had heard all the evidence, he would make an initial opinion of guilt and forward his findings to a grand jury. These grand juries would have been male, mainly consisting of town landowners, freemen, and churchgoers. In other words, Bassett's fate would likely have been dictated by Stratford's most influential residents. Wright remarked on the Thou Shalt Not Suffer, the Witch Hunt podcast, that it is likely several of the town's more powerful men would have been complicit in hastening her journey to the gallows. Would Bassett's old neighbor from Windsor, Thomas Thornton, have also played a role? It's fair to wonder, though we'll likely never know. At the grand jury stage, the panel would listen to witnesses and weigh the evidence before it. It would then issue either a verdict of ignoramus, which meant there was insufficient evidence to convict, or billa vera, which meant there was enough evidence to send the case to Connecticut's highest court. Because Goody would have received the billa vera, she would then be tried by a panel of colonial judicial authorities to decide her final fate, hence why Connecticut's colonial governor found himself in Stratford with 2 magistrate colleagues in May 1651. For those accused of witchcraft in Connecticut, the odds were not in their favor. Roughly 1 in 3 defendants during the Connecticut witch trials were eventually convicted and hanged. By contrast, only 1 in 9 accused witches in Salem faced the same fate. According to Wilcoxson, Bassett's trial would have likely taken place at the town's first meeting house in Sandy Hollow, close to what is today South Avenue. And while no record of the proceedings or the actual verdict survived, records from other trials and statements from other colonial figures reference key details. For one, it's believed that for some reason, Bassett confessed to witchcraft during her trial, something that rarely happened in these cases. Another development actually spurred a subsequent witch trial nearby Fairfield. According to court testimony from another trial, Bassett reportedly testified that there lived a witch there with her head held high. Who? To colonial authorities, they believed Bassett was talking about her friend, Goodwife Knapp. Although Knapp tried pleading with the individual who testified that Bassett was referring to someone else, it was of no help. Knapp followed Bassett in being the fifth witch in Connecticut to be executed, after an investigation uncovered alleged witch marks on her body. That being said, many common skin conditions would have been considered witches' marks, including moles and skin tags. As for where Bassett was hanged, tradition states her hanging occurred in an area known as Gallows Brook or Gallows Swamp in early land records. In that area, there was a crude stone bridge that crossed over a small brook, both of which no longer exist today. It was on this bridge where it's believed Goody's hanging took place. According to Wright's podcast comments, the actual location is likely right in the middle of what's now the railroad tracks of Metro-North Railroad. Wilcoxson believed the site to be around where West Broad Street passes underneath these tracks. Bassett was likely paraded to this site following her confession, surrounded by her peers, magistrates, church officials, and prominent townsfolk. Legend has it that on her way to the bridge, she broke from the procession and rushed to a large roadside rock, clutching it to delay her inevitable fate. Officers eventually pulled her off the rock, but she reportedly clutched it so hard that her fingers left streak marks on it. That rock, known around the town as Witch's Rock, has never been recovered. But Wilcoxson and a 19th century minister, the Reverend Samuel Orcutt, both believe the rock still exists, but as part of someone's cellar wall. They both allege a so-called unromantic individual had blasted the rock out and integrated it into their home. As for Goody's husband, Thomas, his involvement in the trial, or lack thereof, will probably also remain a mystery, but we do know what happened to him after. He reintegrated back into society, moved to Fairfield, and found another wife. While Goody Bassett met an unfortunate fate several centuries ago, that's not the end of the story. In 2023, the Stratford Historical Society introduced a resolution to Stratford's town council to exonerate Goody Bassett from the crime of witchcraft. The society hoped that doing so would help close a dark chapter in its past and restore her reputation. It came on the heels of 2 decades of consistent lobbying efforts at the state level by descendants of convicted Connecticut witches to clear the names of their ancestors. However, at the time of this recording, Stratford has yet to follow the lead of Windsor, which already exonerated Alice Young. It underscores a divide among residents about whether it's the modern town council's place to even exonerate Bassett, or if the authorities at the time, the United Kingdom and church leaders, should do so instead. There's also a difference in opinion as to whether we should defer to the legal standards of the day, however unfair they may seem today. Complicating matters is that we do not know what evidence was brought against Bassett and whether it met the bar to convict, especially considering that not all of Connecticut's accused witches were convicted, with several even being pardoned. And while Connecticut's General Assembly cleared the reputations of Bassett and the colony's other witches in 2023, they never technically exonerated them. Although the original joint resolution had used the word exoneration, the Assembly decided to absolve or forgive the witches instead. Why? Because some members argued that today's state government did not have the authority to wipe away convictions made under British colonial rule. However, as discussions around her exoneration continue, the town of Stratford has honored Bassett and her impact on the town in other ways. For one, the town's mayor, Laura Hoydick, proclaimed May 15th as Goody Bassett Day. And while Bassett's body, like those of other Connecticut witches, would have been left to rot on the noose or have been retrieved at night by family members, the town left a tribute to Bassett in plain sight. It's underneath a graceful tree on Stratford's West Broad Green, which residents and visitors drive by daily as they enter and get off of I-95. There, you'll find a plaque commemorating Goody Bassett and honoring her legacy, very close to the site of her hanging. And that's not all. In May 2023, the Stratford Historical Society held its inaugural Goody Bassett Ball to celebrate her life. Her legacy also lives on in a downtown ice cream shop at the same name, which boasts many delicious flavors to try. While many details about Bassett and her trial may still be lost to time, there's no doubt that her story impacted this otherwise quaint Connecticut town. And even though the evidence we have now is still subject to disagreements and logical inferences, what's established is that Bassett encapsulated a dark time in Stratford, in Connecticut's history, and one that its residents are still reckoning with centuries later. It just goes to show you that even when we're left to fill in the blanks, some mysteries can leave a major impact. Thanks for watching There Is History Here. If you enjoyed diving into the past with us, make sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. Both are free to do and mean a lot for helping us grow our channel and reach more people. Your support helps us continue exploring the stories that shaped our world and the unique history that's right under our noses.